You know, I've been teaching the Bible for a while now. I know to some of you, I don't seem like I'm that old. What could you possibly have done for a while? But I will say that I've been teaching the Bible for almost 15 years. And I just have a hard time gauging how much I have to say and the time that I have to say it in. So I'm coming to terms with the fact that this morning is going to be like the tiniest little introduction of what I really want to say. So if this intrigues you, definitely come back next week because I got more to say on the matter. But I'm only going to be able to introduce the very beginnings of what is turning into a series pretty quickly here. So, yeah, it is what it is. I'm kind of breaking the cardinal rule of never raise more questions than you can answer in one sitting. Well, it's going to take a couple sittings for me to answer them, I think. But I do want to share something with you that is, I believe, a very, what's the word I'm thinking of? Like an arrow hitting the bullseye for our church. There's something that God is wanting to deliver right to the heart of our church, the Coastlands. If you're visiting with us, you're not a part of our church, that's totally fine. These things can be for you too. That's not to say it excludes you. But it is to say that I do believe God is wanting to deliver a timely message to us this morning and in the coming weeks. Galatians chapter 4, we're going to be going over verses 22 to 31. And this is a kind of a dense section of Scripture. And the author of this book, of the book of Galatians, his name's Paul, and he's drawing from two different Old Testament scriptures. One is Abraham in Genesis, and the second one is in the book of Isaiah. And he's bringing these things together to try to communicate a principle that I'm going to try to introduce this morning. And it basically has to do with the following. It's this idea that God is so full of promises for our lives. And that means exactly what it sounds like. God makes a promise to us, but the promise maker, God, is also the one who keeps or fulfills the promises that he makes. So he makes a promise, I am going to rescue you, and then he is the one who then rescues you. The promise maker is the promise keeper. But there can be tension in our lives when God says something, he makes a promise, he says, I'm going to rescue you. There can be tension, there can be struggle as you and I are tempted to, after receiving this promise from God, try to be the one to fulfill what God had promised he was going to do. So in that simple analogy, God saying, I'm going to rescue you. There can be a struggle on our behalf sometimes where we say, thanks God for saying that you're going to rescue me, and then I'm going to try to do what I can to rescue myself. And that tension between one path, which would be believing in God and allowing him to do what his promised to do, and then the other path, which is taking matters into our own hands and doing it on our own, that's the tension that this section of Scripture is describing. The words that it uses in here to describe those two paths is promise on the one hand, the path of promise, where you're believing in God's promises and you're allowing him to fulfill them, and then flesh on the other hand, which is just kind of a Bible word for describing what man is able to do on his own, by himself, without God. You don't need God to do things of flesh. I'm also going to use kind of the words faith and flesh. It has kind of the same central idea. Am I believing that God is the one who's going to do this, or am I going to take matters into my own hands? So I think I'm just going to read verses, 22 through 29. So let's start in Galatians 4, 22 through 29. It says this, for it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by the bondwoman and one by the free woman. But the son of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and the son of the free woman through the promise. This is allegorically speaking. That word just means kind of like a metaphor. It's like an extended metaphor. For these women represent two covenants, one proceeding from Mount Sinai, bearing children who are to be slaves, and she is Hagar. Now this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free, she is our mother. For it is written, rejoice, barren woman who does not bear, and break forth and shout, you who are not in labor. For more are the children of the desolate than of the one who has a husband. And you, brethren, like Isaac, are children of promise. But as at that time he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, and so it is now also. Okay. Ambitious. We're going to get in there. What in the world is this talking about? Jerusalem is my mother? Like, I thought my mother was my mother. Like, what is that talking about? And like, Hagar is a mountain, but she's a woman too, and people are born to be slaves. Like, what in the world is going on here? Okay, so again, the idea that Paul is trying to get at is that we often have two paths in front of us. One is the path of things you can do on your own without God. And the other path available to you is to believe that God is able to do the things that he said he was going to do. And even after God articulates a promise to you, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is fulfilled. I mean, probably many of us could say, yeah, God has promised this kind of things in my life. He's put this desire in my heart. He's put a promise in my heart. And even though the promise has been put in my heart, it's not yet fulfilled. And so you, as a human, you have a decision to make. Am I going to allow God to fulfill that, or am I going to try to do it on my own? So in order to describe those two different paths, Paul is using a historical story, the story of Abraham, who's called the father of faith, and talking about the time when God gave Abraham an incredible promise, a mind-blowingly big promise, where God said to Abraham, all of the people of the earth are going to be blessed through you, and you're going to have so many kids, so many descendants, that they're going to outnumber the sands of the beaches of the earth. And so, many of you probably know some details of that story, that God spoke that to Abraham when he and his wife, Sarah, they couldn't even have one child, much less many children. That reminds me of the time when we had some people who got lost. They were trying to turn somewhere else, and they turned into our church on accident while we were having church. And one of the people who used to be a pastor here, Michael Martinez, just happened to be walking, and he saw them kind of like, he saw them in that car, the unsure car driver, like, where am I going? And he said, hey, can I help you? Well, it turns out that these folks were from China, and they're two parents and a daughter, and the daughter like spoke a little bit of English, but not a ton of English, and the parents no English. And so Michael, he's so hospitable. He's like, come on inside. I know you didn't come to church, but anyway, come on inside. It'll be great. Come on in. And so they get out of their car and they go inside and they use the restroom, and they're over here by the kids entrance. And there happen to be a bunch of pictures of kids from our VBS, our Vacation Bible School. Like tons of kids, right? Tons of pictures of kids. And they're kind of looking around and they have no idea. They didn't even know we were a church. Like, I'm not even sure they knew what that was. Anyway, so like, thanks for letting us use the restroom. And then Michael kind of told them where to go. And then the daughter like translated something to the parents, and then the father was like, and then like said something back to the daughter, and the daughter turns to Michael, because Michael was trying to tell them about VBS, like, yeah, we have a bunch of kids here, and here's some stuff. And the daughter says to Michael, my father says, congratulations on all your children. And the father was like, and Michael's like, no. There was pictures of like hundreds of kids. And the father's like, wow, congratulations on all your children. You obviously need a large house to house all of your children. He's like, no, that's not. So God says to Abraham, who can't even have one kid, you're going to have so many descendants. It's amazing. That was the promise that was given. And what we're going to study in the coming weeks is the very precise language that is used that makes it very clear that God says, I will multiply you. He doesn't say, you're going to multiply for yourself. It wasn't a commandment even. It was a promise. I will multiply you. Go into all the earth, be fruitful and multiply. That's a commandment, but this was a promise that was given. So God gave Abraham this promise, And you might know the story that they still could not conceive a child, he and his wife. So his wife had this idea, well, we have this bond slave, this woman named Hagar. Abraham, why don't you take her as a wife and have a child through her? And they did. That's exactly what they did. The first son that was born to Abraham was done through this very, I'm going to do it on my own path. So that's what all this stuff means when he's saying, oh, there's the son that's according to the bond slave, and then there's the son according to the free woman. He's talking about the son through Hagar and the son through Sarah. Now, the son through Sarah was the son of promise. It was the descendant of promise, because Sarah was the one that was barren. It wasn't Abraham, obviously, because he was able to have a child by Hagar. But when they did it according to their own mechanisms, that's what Paul is talking about here. So he's speaking to people who believe in Jesus, and he's like, guys, you started out this whole process by believing in God. What makes you think that you're going to perfect this new covenant by your works of flesh, the things that you were able to accomplish on your own? When you began it by grace and faith, what makes you believe that you're going to perfect it by your works? On the contrary, we walk forward in God by faith. So that's the contrast that is happening here. But the point that I want to bring up to you and to talk about for our church is that if you zoom like way out, okay, just pretend like you didn't know much about that story. You zoom way out, and all you know is that God promised Abraham, you're going to have many descendants. That's what he said. When he had Ishmael through Hagar, the bondwoman, you might be tempted to think, looks like God was right. Look, you're beginning to have descendants. Even though we know that the way that he did it wasn't right, and that's not what God was talking about. But Ishmael looked as much a son of Abraham as Isaac when Isaac was born. Do you understand me? In our lives, it's the same. Works of flesh often look really similar in the beginning to works of faith. And in that way, you and I can kind of be tricked sometimes into thinking, yeah, I'm really doing it. Thanks, God, for that promise. And then I went on my own and I made it happen. Thanks for the heads up to know exactly what to do. And that is something that has been, I don't know, a struggle of mine. And also, I think it's something very poignant for our church. I've been saying it for a while that I am concerned that works of flesh have been masquerading themselves or looking like works of faith. How does one tell a difference? That's what I want to get into. I was thinking about a time in my life when I really struggled with this. I had just moved to a new town to continue my studies in Southern California, and the church that I was a part of, I had been going there for a couple years. I was really involved in ministry with the young adults, and I was becoming more and more a leader in that ministry, so much so that I was a leader of leaders in that ministry. And I learned a lot about who God made me to be. I learned a lot about the kinds of things that God would use me in order to help and bless other people. Well, then I moved to a totally different town and started going to a totally different church. And it really wasn't like some sort of, I didn't know that this was in my heart. But when I went to that new church, I basically just used my previous experience to try to figure out what is the fastest humanly possible way I can get back into leadership in this new group, in this new context. Because, well, that's who God made me to be. I'm a leader. So how can I step into leadership in this new context? And again, it wasn't necessarily like it was like that was a super wicked thought. If I told this to you, you'd probably say like, cool, sounds good. Sounds like you want to serve and follow God. But what I didn't realize is that I was doing it like by my own efforts. So yeah, I do believe that God has made me to be a leader, but stepping into that isn't something that I do on my own. Like here's a scripture. It says, promotion or advancement, authority is not given. It doesn't come from the east or from the west. It comes only from the mouth of the Lord. So I was trying to establish my own authority in this new group. And what I realized was that I had figured out the modern Western church and how to become a leader in any church. I could tell you the secret. It works here too, by the way. Totally works. If you want to be a leader, just follow this formula and bang, you'll be a leader. Show up early and serve, and eventually the leaders will be like, wow, you know what you're doing. You want to teach the Bible? That's basically how it works. And I knew that. So what did I do? I showed up early to the meetings, I set up the chairs, and I was really nice, held my Bible, and sure enough, they started inviting me into things. But what God showed me is that it's like something had gotten off inside of me, because it was more that I wanted to climb the corporate church ladder than it was that I really wanted to make a difference in people's lives. Now, I didn't know that. I wasn't trying to be some snake. There was a part of me that totally wanted to help people. But it's like I used my knowledge of church as a crutch instead of actually relying on God. And then what ended up happening was that I was serving the process of church more than I was serving the people in that church or the God of that church. Now you can agree with me okay, that's not good. That's not right. But see, it masqueraded itself as something that sounded really great. I want to do Bible studies. I want to teach people because God has taught me a lot. That's good. But it was coming from a place that was really of my own power. I knew exactly what to do in order to become a leader. I knew exactly what to do, let me translate it, in order to take the place that God had promised me. I knew exactly what to do. But you know what the problem with that is? You don't need God if you know exactly what to do. You realize that? So then you're not dependent on him. It's completely dependent on your own concepts, your own ideas. And that really, really rocked me. And then my whole concept of that broke down. God just put up barriers everywhere for me stepping into leadership at this church. And it drove me crazy. And that's when I knew I really had some pride things going on. It really was a work of flesh rather than a work of faith. I started a Bible study with some people, and I liked them, and I wanted to do a Bible study. And again, if you heard me telling this story and you're like, what's so wrong about starting a Bible study? Well, nothing per se, except that there was something in my heart that wasn't right. So I started a Bible study, and then the leaders of this group asked me to stop doing the Bible study. And the reason drove me nuts. The reason they told me was, oh, we want to do a Bible study with them 9 months from now. I'm like, I'll be done 3 times over in 9 months. You kidding me? They wanted me to stop my Bible study because they had plans for those people in 9 months. I'm like, I'll stop it at month 8. We're good, no worries. But no, they really wanted me to stop. I was so frustrated because do you not realize who God has made me to be? I am a leader. God has sent me to bless these people, and apparently to teach you. Yikes. And I called my dad all sorts of grouchy. Can you believe it? They asked me to do this. No. And my dad said, Evan, you need to stop doing the Bible study. Because you've decided to go to this group, and those are the leaders of that group. And you've decided to submit yourself to them, and so if they're saying that's what's best for this group, you need to submit yourself to that. Okay, fine. But, he said, there's no law against love. And no one can ask you not to go to lunch. So that's what I did. I went to lunch with individuals rather than gathering a group of people around me. And I learned something very, very profound in that time. And one of the reasons I learned something profound is because I ended up talking to a guy who was not originally a part of the Bible study. He was not on my list of people to invite, to my shame, because he was this guy who was a part of the group who, he was just really hard to talk to. He was really hard to interact with. And like I said, this was a young adults group, and he was a little bit on the older side. And so there already was like just kind of some awkwardness there already. He was single. He obviously did not want to be single, but he was older. He was really hard to talk to. And especially for the ladies, it just like, it wasn't great. So I noticed him, and here I was, not being able to be the leader that I was, take the rightful place that I had because God had called me to this, and like, how dare you not recognize that, and all sorts of grouchy things. And God just kind of, I don't know what to say, he just put this guy on my heart. And because I was getting denied all over the place, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do this, I can't do that. I kept setting up chairs, though. I kept serving. I didn't leave church. I kept serving. But I noticed this guy, and so I just started talking to him. The reason why he was so hard to talk to is because he talked about himself a lot. And he talked about how smart he was. He talked about how many things that he knew. And oh my gosh, it went up to 11 as soon as he found out that I was in graduate school at the university that I was going to. It's a very good graduate school. As soon as he learned that, then it was all about, oh my gosh, and I'm so smart too. And that just bugs me. Doesn't it bug you when somebody like story tops you? Like, oh, I went on a walk the other day, like, oh yeah, that reminds me of when I climbed Mount Everest. Yeah. It's like, shut up, dude, come on. I was talking about going on a walk. Like I went to my mailbox, you know what I mean? Like, you don't need to do that. Like, I'll just give it to you. You're more athletic than me. Like, whatever. Like, it's fine. And those are I'm kind of having fun with it, but like those are the kinds of things that would come up, and it was really difficult. Well, God is really challenging me in this time, because not only did I not have the group that I wanted to have, full of like people who are going to be leaders and like it's going to be great and I'm going to really dig into the Bible and show them how awesome of a Bible teacher I am, and then everybody will know. Instead of that, here I am talking to like the person that nobody wants to talk to. He didn't have any friends. He shows up to the group. He obviously stands by himself. He obviously sits by himself. Obviously nobody talks to him. Everybody had kind of like established this social contract that like basically we're all fine with this. He's alone. We're good. It's all fine. So I crossed the line and started talking to this guy, and I just stomached it, and God taught me a lot about what it's like, just like what the point of church is. I've never been a person who has been angry at church or grouchy about church, or like, oh my gosh, church is broken. Like, yeah, no kidding. Because it's full of humans. What could possibly go wrong when humans are in charge? Like, people say that like it's like the biggest revelation, like, oh my gosh, like we got to get back to the early church. The early church was all sorts of broken too. Anyway, it wasn't about where that young adults group was at, where that church was at. It was irrelevant. What God was wanting to teach me was it boils down to this is what one human heart gets to do for another. And sometimes our familiarity with the way that things have been done gets in the way of the very purpose of church, which is to help other humans. And so this guy, no, I didn't want to talk to him very much because he talked about himself all the time, story-topping me like crazy. But I just listened to him. And then I found out why he story-tops, why he talked about himself. And it just blew my mind. Turns out that this guy grew up in the foster care system. You know the foster care system? And he had been passed around from house to house all throughout his childhood. And as a child, he basically was rejected by one form of authority after another, one after another, after another, after another. As a child. And like even as an adult, that's hard to handle. But as a child, you don't understand. You just like, maybe you're my mom and dad. Nope, rejected again. Maybe you're going to be my mom and dad. Nope, rejected again. Again and again and again and again. And I learned that people who talk about themselves, often it's a cry for help. And the reason why they talk about themselves a lot is because they feel like no one's actually listening to them. No one is noticing them. No one really cares. That's why they're talking about themselves all kind. Because maybe if someone is impressed with me enough, they'll give me the time of day. And so this man saw something in me. He wanted to be loved by me. He wanted to be liked by me. He saw me something as an authority figure. And here I was complaining about the fact that I didn't have a position of authority. And there was this man who was already looking at me like I was an authority figure. And I hadn't done anything. I had done nothing. No Bible study, no prayer, no nothing. I just talked to the guy. And he looked at me, an authority figure. And that's why he was trying to prove to me that he was worth my time. That's why he kept talking about all of his accolades, all the things that he accomplished. And so, frankly, once I learned about his background, I was very impressed. I can't believe that coming from where you came from, you have been able to do all of these things. I can't even believe you're functional right now, given how much you have been ravaged by authority. There was a moment when he was telling me about the worst of his foster parents, a man who, you know what I'm saying. I don't know why exactly, but this man just hated the sight of my friend. And so he would often put out cigarettes on him, like smoking cigarettes, put it out on him because he just wanted him to get away. Just get out of here. He just couldn't stand the sight of him. So he would put his cigarettes out on him. So I'm talking with this guy. He's finally pouring out his heart to me, and I'm like, here we go, this is it. And he pulls his shirt away, and he's like, these are the scars from my experience in the foster system. And I'm looking at these point scars of all these cigarettes that had been put out on him, and I'm just like, dear God, what am I supposed to do? And all of the experience that I had in church, all of the thoughts that I had about rising up into leadership, all of the knowledge that I had, every single Bible study I'd ever done was completely worthless in that moment. When this man was just pouring out his heart and is like, I've been abused. And he wasn't even asking a question, he was just sharing. And I didn't know what to do. Quite the contrast between that path of flesh that's I know what to do, and I'm going to do it for myself. I'm going to rise to a position of authority. I'm going to take everything that God has promised to me, and I'm going to do it myself. Quite the contrast, wasn't it? To being in that sort of authority, but then not knowing what to do. And ironically, after that time, I literally didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. And I just said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And then I was driving home from the group that night, and I called one of my mentors because I'm like, I don't know what to do. So I need somebody to help me know what to do. So I called one of my mentors, and I said, hey, I've got this guy. I've been talking with him. He finally kind of told me a lot of his background, and it's really intense, and I don't know what to do about it. And my mentor says, is this man married? I said, no. He said, you'll be fine. Click. Excuse me. I was coming to you so you could answer me. Tell me what I'm supposed to do in this, right? Because that's how it works. That's how church works. I figured it out. You go ask people. You figure it out. They tell you the answers, and then you do the answers. It's not rocket science. Now, you need to understand, do I believe that God will speak through humans in order to help other people? Absolutely. Has my life greatly been blessed in that? 100%. But do you understand that I wasn't going to my mentor to hear from God. I was going to find the answer that was going to solve my problem right now. It was a work of my flesh. It was what I knew to do. I didn't even have to go to God. I didn't even pray to God. I'm kind of ashamed about that. I didn't even pray to God. I called Mike. Because he's basically as good as God. He hears from God all the time, so I'm going to call him. He knows how to hear from God way better than I do. Why should I go to God at all? I called him. And Mike knew what I needed was to hang up the phone. Whoa, dude, discipleship with risk. Let's go. But he was so right. So I went to the Lord, and God did not say anything that complex to me. He didn't give me some intricate scripture and I need to do a word study on temple and find out what the answer is for it. It wasn't that at all. God's like, I gave you big physical ears. Why don't you use them, dude? These things. And so I just continued to listen to this guy. And then one time I just felt prompted to give him a hug. And it was one of the most spiritual encounters I've ever had in my life. And looking back, I didn't know this at the time. I wasn't oh my gosh, I wasn't playing chess, okay? It was just one human heart to another human heart. He seemed like he needed a hug, so I just gave the guy a hug. Looking back, though, I realized that I had become a picture of male authority in his life. And I'm not sure the dude had ever been hugged by a male authority ever. I think maybe the only time he had experienced contact from a male authority in his life was to hurt him or reject him, get away from me. And so I gave him a hug, and he just was bawling. It was one of the longest hugs I've ever had in my life. And I just felt I'm going to squeeze you as hard as I can, because and I think that was an expression of God saying to his son, this man, I am your father, and I love you. That did way more to do something for him than my works of flesh, than my knowledge, than my study, than my training, than all of that stuff. I had been brought humbled to a place where I needed to rely on God to do what God had promised that he was going to do, and that was to make me a leader. And I was a leader in that man's life. It wasn't how I thought it was going to go. It didn't look how I thought it was going to look, but it definitely involved faith because I didn't know what to do. And taught me so much. And now, fast forwarding to 2018, in our church, I believe that there is a battle that is waging between what are the things that I am doing of my own power without God versus the things that I am believing for God to do because he's the only one that can really do it. And though Ishmael might look like Isaac, their names are spelled similarly, for crying out loud, there is a difference. Because through the line of one came Jesus and not the other. What God has in mind for you goes so much deeper than what you think you're going to be able to do in the immediate moment. It extends further and deeper than that. And what we are invited to be are people of faith who have to believe that God is the one who's going to accomplish this rather than I'm going to be the one to accomplish it. I want to leave you with one last thought here. Two main points I wanted to bring to you this morning. Number one, the works of flesh and the works of faith look really similar in the beginning. Number two, it says, as we read, that Ishmael, he actually bullied or persecuted Isaac when they were both growing up. So remember, Abraham had Ishmael by Hagar, and he had Isaac by Sarah. Isaac was the son of promise. Ishmael was the son of flesh. The son or the fruit of flesh persecuted the son of promise. And I really believe this is the word of the Lord for our church. That the reason why some of you are struggling in your believing in God is because you have still existing thoughts and patterns of works of flesh. And those things, having taken root in your life, are persecuting the growth of new faith. And so the answer is really clear. Cast out those works of flesh. Cast off those patterns of what you can do on your own and instead engage in faith. It's repentance, really. But it just was like total revelation. Ishmael was trying to bully and persecute Isaac. So as I'm trying to cultivate my faith, if I allow these works of flesh, it's not just that it's wrong to do that, it's that it creates a hostile environment for faith to grow. So get rid of that, get rid of the aggressor, and your faith is going to be more free to grow up into the fully grown Isaac that it was always intended to be. That's what we're going to talk about in the coming weeks here. And I'm looking forward to kind of fleshing that out a little bit for you. Pun intended. Let's go. Oh, come on. That was like... All right. Yeah, so this is just the introduction to what I really wanted to say, which is going to happen in the next 2 weeks. But I want to talk about how we can become people of faith rather than people who are just doing things of our own power. If that sounds interesting to you, we'd love to have you join us in the next couple of weeks. And otherwise, we'll see you when we see you. Love you. So glad you're here. And that's that. Bye-bye.